All right. I am going to read today from this book that my two of my daughters put together with all my some of my writings in it, and so I will start with since many of you in the audience are old enough to be grandparents. I will start with a story about my grandmother. Um, my grandmother was an inspiration to me. I was lucky enough to spend all my summers with her and Grandpa at their home at 124 South Mills in Madison, Wisconsin. Grandma had a lot of difficulties in her life, but I never heard her complain. Her only daughter, my aunt, had fallen while playing as a child and had a brain injury which paralyzed her left side. In those days, there was no physical therapy, and she was always what she called a shut-in. My father, her only son, died at 29. From the time I was 7 or 8, Grandma let me wander at will when I was staying with her. I had to take my little brother with me, but that was fine. We loved the zoo and went there often. We knew every animal, and some would come to us when we called. When they cut the grass, we would take armfuls to feed Annie the elephant. On Sunday morning, they let us ride the camels. Swaying side to side up high was a little scary, but we held on tight and loved it. I loved to swim, and Grandma said one day, "You would go swimming if you had to scoop a hole in the algae to dive in." She was funny and right. Another day, when I was going to swim, she asked me where my bathing suit was. I showed her that I had it under my dress. She asked, "Where's your underwear?" I showed her that it was in the pocket of my dress. And she said, "Anyone who can put their underwear in their pocket is not wearing enough underwear." I laughed with her. Grandpa was in charge of all the facilities that made the University of Wisconsin work. He supervised water, electricity, and the necessary utilities. My brother and I met him at a large bridge leading to the Wisconsin campus, and he gave us a ride home every day in his big Dodge. They had a 3-story house near the university campus. Students from abroad lived in the upper 2 floors. They would often come in to talk. I liked the Chinese ones best. They liked to see and play with children because their own children were far away. My brother and I played on the campus. It was always fun to climb up the statue of Abraham Lincoln and sit on his lap. When I got older, I had to get summer jobs and so didn't get to spend as much time with her. However, when I did visit, Grandma would say, "What is our adventure going to be today?" We always found something wonderful to do. We explored the Capitol building, which was modeled on the one in Washington, D.C. We went to interesting places on the campus, such as the dairy building, where we could get a cup of freshly churned buttermilk. She loved to take me shopping and always brought me something unusual, one special thing. My grandfather died, and after a while, a friend of the family came courting. One day, I hid in the backseat of the car to see what they did when they sat there. Actually, they hugged and kissed. I thought it was wonderful until I got caught. Grandma laughed, but her friend was not so pleased. They did marry and were happy together. After nursing school, I got a chance to visit Grandma off and on, but she met me at the train this one day and suggested that we walk in the park with the zoo. We saw all the animals and then sat down near the water to talk and enjoy being together. It was during the war, and we saw 2 young soldiers on motorcycles riding by several times. The boys looked as if they were having fun. Finally, they dismounted and sat on a bench next to ours. They started a conversation, and we had a while of fun talking to them. They asked if we would like a ride around the park. Grandma said, "Oh, I won't, but my granddaughter would love to." I went and really enjoyed it, especially over the little arched bridges over the stream. I was always sorry that we didn't beg Grandma more, because I'll bet if we had, she would have ridden on the motorcycle and enjoyed it. My grandma was really fun. Now, I have a story about about the Camp from Hell, it's called. Uh, Being a nurse has opened many doors for me. I found myself with some time off and no particular plans one summer. So the notice I got telling of several positions for nurses in a boys' camp on the seacoast sounded like just what I wanted. I applied, was interviewed, and hired. There was a week of orientation before the second session of the camp opened. They told me to bring golf clubs and any other sports equipment I liked. They also said the nurses and doctors would have sailing lessons. What fun! They also said hours on duty were flexible, and we were sure to have a good time. During the first day of orientation, 18 very sick, young, healthy-looking counselors were admitted to the hospital area, some with temperatures of up to 105. There was not room for that many, so we put cots in the halls. They had headaches, chills, severe cough, and nausea. We sponged them down, got them to drink as much fluid as they could take. A number had trouble walking even as far as the bathroom. This was orientation with a vengeance. The head nurse tried to catch up with us when possible to show us where supplies, equipment, and medications were located. We had found out a lot just by necessity. I had signed up to give allergy shots, which gave me a cubicle where I could sit down occasionally. Among other tasks, we emptied trash, swept the floors, and continued to nurse our patients. As the week went on, a few recovered enough to go back to their bunkhouse. It seemed that each one who felt a bit better was replaced by one of the few who had not been ill at first. We were sure that the second session of camp would be canceled, but it was not. We were notified in the dining area when there was time to eat. The head of the camp also tried to teach us some rousing camp songs. We were not roused. The second session of camp began with a skeleton crew of counselors. Luckily, the young men were basically healthy, so that while weak and tired, they went on with their duties. All the little boys were delighted to be at camp for about 3 days. Then they started to come into the clinic with the same symptoms. The healthy ones went swimming, which turned out to be painful because the water was full of jellyfish. The little guys came in with red welts and blisters from the jellyfish stings. Several of the sicker boys were sent to the hospital in town. A father flew in and took his son, and a number of other parents came to get their boys. Needless to say, the nurses and doctors were working around the clock. Before long, they began to have symptoms. They were the saddest looking crew I'd ever seen. I lasted for 2 weeks, but when I got feeling feverish and ill, I told the head of the camp I was leaving. He said I had signed a contract. I was able to hold my head up long enough to say, "Sue me," or words to that effect. After I had been at home, recovering for a while, I got a letter from the Department of Public Health of that county. They had gone in to investigate and found some very serious type of flu. I did wonder if the camp would go on the next year. It did. And let's see. My next story is my first car. My first car was a Cadillac Town Car, which my husband bought for $100. I always believed that it had been used for funerals. It had room for all 6 of my children, and they liked playing in it when we weren't going someplace. There was room for the playpen between seats and room for 2 jump seats to be pulled down. The children liked to put flowers in the little vases on the side walls. It was a bit hard to steer, but I was strong. We had one adventure because of the difficulty of steering. We were driving up the road at night when I saw a car following us closely. I was concerned and kept looking in my rearview mirror. Suddenly, blue lights began to flash and I pulled over. A policeman came up, looked at me and the 2 kids beside me, no seatbelts in those days, the playpen, 2 more children, and 2 in the back seat. He said, "Well, I thought you were drunk, but you have more problems than that. Where are you going?" I told him I was headed for Chapel Hill, and he said, "We will escort you there. Drive that tank safely." We arrived in style. After about a year, as I was driving to the grocery store, one of the axles broke. It was quite loud and dramatic. We were sorry to see our first car towed away. And here is another story about cars and me. Today, golden exclamation point came up on my car's dashboard. The owner's manual said, "Take it to the dealer now." In fear and trembling, I took my little Emily, as I had named my car, into the sacred halls of repair and restoration. After a short time, a man came and said, "Her tires were low all around, that's all." What joy! On the way home, I began to think of other cars with which I had been associated. My first driving experience was when I was about 15. My dear stepfather said he would help me learn to drive. He drove us out to some little traveled country roads where I could go forward, backward, and turn around. It felt wonderful. He said I was doing so well that I could drive home. When we got to the driveway, I began to feel insecure and asked him to take over. He said, "Oh, just turn in and go to the garage door." I turned in, but when the crucial moment came, my foot slipped off the brake and onto the accelerator. I drove through, not just to, the garage door. But finally found the brake. My father said it was all right. I'd do better next time, and he would fix the door. My first car was the Cadillac town car. And let's see. My next story is going back to school. When I was 45 years old, I went back to school. I had an RN degree from many years before, but had always wanted to complete college work. It was especially interesting because my life had been so different. I had been married to a doctor and had been involved in many community activities. One was being chairman of the Hospital Women's Auxiliary. The week I enrolled in our community college, the local newspaper published a photograph of me presenting a check to the college for $10,000 from the Women's Auxiliary. This may have led to one of my first experiences in school. I took a biology class and was seated next to a young man in jeans and a t-shirt who had a bushy beard. At this time, the hippie flower children were coming back into the mainstream. The teacher looked at my seatmate and said, "You will either shave that beard or fail this class." I was amazed, and before I had time to think, I said, "I cannot see that facial hair has anything to do with performance in this class." After class, the young man asked me to be his lab partner. I said I would like to. It turned out that his father was the head of the biology department at UNC. We had a good time, learned a lot. He did not shave, and we both got A's. There were a number of these young people who had come back to school. They invited me to their be-ins. These were parties where they discussed interesting issues, drank a little beer, and smoked a little pot. I enjoyed the discussions and the beer, but didn't really want to try the pot. They said it was mind expanding. I told them my mind was so expanded that I didn't want it to explode. They finally decided I was okay the way I was. They were good folk. Another experience, rather painful, was when I took American history and we studied World War II as history. Good heavens, that was my life for a number of years, working 12 hours a day as a nursing student. We almost ran the hospital because the RN graduates were all in the Army or Navy. We naively believed that no sacrifice was too great because this was the war to end all wars. And now it was history. Oh, a lot of the instructors were excellent. They liked teaching and didn't want to write or do research, so they stayed at the community college level. One exception was my algebra teacher. He was really the basketball coach who taught algebra out of a book. I was having trouble anyway because in 30 years the whole vocabulary of algebra had changed. I had never heard of a positive or negative integer. I spent a lot of time in the learning lab. The coach went slogging along in class and shouted at us when we didn't understand something. One day I had enough and said loud and clear, "When we don't understand, raising your voice doesn't help. Explain it to us." All around me I heard whispers of, "Way to go, Carol, way to go, way to go." He stopped shouting, but since he didn't have a clue about how to explain, all of us who wanted to pass spent a lot of time in the learning lab and got through the class. In the public speaking class, we were asked to give and narrate a demonstration. I decided to make my famous boiled cookies. I took a hot plate and the necessary equipment and ingredients. It was easy and well within the time limit to make the cookies and serve them. I was popular in that class. My children, there were my classmates were mostly the age of my older children. They were some of the most interesting people I've ever known. My children insisted that I go through the graduation ceremony so they could cheer. They did, but I was only a little embarrassed. I'm glad I went through it because I eschewed the ceremony when I finished college and my graduate program. Okay, let's see what's next. Oh, after I had seen the doctor about my ailing knee, I looked at the brochure they gave me about the surgical procedure they do on knees. I saw how they saw off some bones and pound metal things into other bones. I thought, spare me the details. Then I remembered the first time I heard that saying. When I was a society lady in Pinehurst, it was, at that time, the style to have one's hair done with Jell-O, to give that bouffant look. Forgive me if I paused with a shudder. A dance at the country club let me show off my new gown and my new hairdo. The man with whom I was dancing said I looked very pretty. I said, "Thank you. You know, I had my hair done with cherry Jell-O today." And he said, "Spare me the details." Nice, smart man. And then I had a trial for reading too much. It began on a snowy morning when my young children were at home because there was no school. In North Carolina, when there's an inch of snow, everything closes down. They came into the kitchen where I was reading and sipping a cup of coffee. The oldest said, "We are requiring you to come into the living room." They were all looking very serious, so off I went with them. They had a special chair in which I was told to sit and said that I was a prisoner in the dock. I was told that I was on trial. The charge was reading books when I should be playing with my children. They had apparently been watching Perry Mason on television because I was informed that Janet, 7 years old, was Perry Mason. Charlie, a venerable 5-year-old, was the prosecuting attorney, and Nancy, age 3, was a witness for the prosecution. As you might guess, I was speedily convicted and sentenced to spend the day playing with them in the snow. We had a wonderful day in the snow. And the next story is called Pumpkin Patch. Shortly after I moved to North Carolina, just before one Halloween, I decided that my kids had never seen a pumpkin patch, so we would go out to find one. They were all eager, and so we usually had several extra kids along, and the car was full. I drove out into Moore County and found a little general store beside the road. I went in and asked the proprietor where I could find a pumpkin patch. He said, "Well, look, lady, you just go down the road in front of the store until you get to the third driveway to the right. You drive in there and you'll find your pumpkin patch." I did just what he said. The driveway was rough and rutted, and it was quite a way in to the shack at the end. I stopped and started to get out of the car when a man burst out of the door with a shotgun aimed right at me. I stammered, I was just looking for your pumpkin patch." He said, "Nothing here for you. Get gone right now." I hung a speedy U-turn and got gone in a hurry. I went back and stormed into the store. "Why did you send me there?" I said. He said, "Lady, I thought you was funning me. Never thought you'd go there." I said, "That man pointed a gun at me. The storekeeper said, he's got a couple of stills out there and thought you was a revenuer. I'm glad you had all those kids along, or he'd have shot you for sure." So we went back to the A&P pumpkin patch for our pumpkins. Later I found out what a still was. Okay. Here's a story called My Trip. The interstate highway system is, as someone has said, is a way to drive across the United States without seeing any of it. I was on my way from Durham to see my family in Nashville. After 200 miles of straight road with here and there a well-banked curve, I was happy to see a detour. My tired mind, which had been in neutral gear, came alive enough for me to turn into the side road. The road seemed to lead into a forest. I hadn't seen huge dark trees like these ever. As I go on, I notice that the road has narrowed and now is little more than 2 dirt trucks. It ends. There's no place to turn around. I can't back out. It's almost dark. The path ahead leads on through the trees. Birds are softly twittering, getting ready to settle down for the night. I notice that there are more different birds flying about than I had ever seen before. They are not afraid and come close to me. I see a spot of light ahead and hurry toward it. There is music, a sort of a chant. I see a group of dancers around a fire and run toward them. They do not speak, but signal me to join the dance. I dance joyfully with them. As we dance, my mind, body, and spirit seem to become free. Many of the men wear long beards. The clothing of everyone, men and women, is green, the tender green of spring leaf buds, and the vibrant deep green of summer ripeness. One by one, the people drift off toward the trees, and I find that I am dancing alone. Where have they gone? I look about, but can find no one. My head suddenly bounces up. I am in my car beside the road. A policeman is shining a flashlight into my face. "Are you all right?" he asks. I tell him I'm fine. Then he says, "I'm really glad you pulled it over to the side of the road before you fell asleep." I had quite a dream. And this story is called Jennifer's Bear. The new writers group leader said, "Look around you for stories and things you see every day. My first thought was a little teddy bear, about 6 inches tall. It had no hair, but is white with small pink ribbons scattered about on its body. Every time I look at it, I think of my granddaughter Jennifer, who gave it to me when I had breast cancer. She was a young teenager, so I was pleased that she cared. We had a lot of fun together as she was growing up. Jen was always fearless. I got several of her mother, Liz's, stories. Jen's older brother, Chris, saved her life a number of times. They were out in the yard one day when Jen was about 2. Chris said, "Mom, Jennifer just ate a mushroom. Did you see her?" Liz said that she and the poison control people were practically on a first-name basis, so she knew the number by heart. They suggested Epicac. Liz had some handy and had cleaned out the mushroom and all. Another day they were visiting a friend who had a swimming pool. Liz put inflatable arm bands on Jen, 3 years old, and began talking to her friend. Liz heard a splash, and Chris said, "Mom, Jen just jumped into the pool." The inflatables were lying neatly on the side of the pool, and when Liz looked, Jen was sitting on the bottom of the deep end of the pool, smiling up at her. So in Liz went, clothes, shoes, and all, to fish her out. Liz decided that Jen needed swimming lessons after that last adventure, and so she went to a swim center to sign her up. She checked carefully to see that there were no plants to eat and no benches or chairs to climb up on or jump off of. She stationed Chris next to the door and told him not to let her Jen escape. She put her keys on a high counter while she was looking at the list of possible classes. Somehow Jen got the keys and put one in an electric socket. A woman coming in the front door screamed, "Oh my God, that baby is flying!" Liz looked up to see Jen flying about 20 feet through the air. She called the doctor and asked him what to do. He asked if she was conscious. Liz said, "Can't you hear her screaming?" He said that any damage that could be done had been done already, so just watch her. Luckily, she wasn't holding the key tightly. Jennifer started riding Chris's small two-wheel bike when she was 4. One day she rode down the hill next to her house and skidded into the gravel driveway. She catapulted off the bike, face first. Her brother said, "Let me see your face," and Liz heard him say, "Oh." After the blood had been sponged off her knees, elbows, and face, they went to the emergency room. There was a rather large open wound on her forehead, but it wasn't bleeding. The doctor probed and out flew a pebble. Liz said, "Wow, did it bleed then?" When Jennifer and I drove together, she would turn on the radio and ask me to direct the orchestra. One day she said, "Graham, what is that stuff hanging off your arm?" I said, "Jen, it's called blab, and if you live long enough, you'll get some too." I don't believe she ever will because she is always athletic and coordinated. She went into college on a ROTC scholarship and joined the Army as soon as she was graduated. After a time, she was sent to Kuwait, and a new general took over her unit and chose her as a aide-de-camp. And actually, she emailed that she was busy from morning till night with all the things the general needed doing, and had advanced to being first lieutenant. When her time was over, the general wanted to send her to law school. This was not for Jen. She wanted to do something with action attached. She went to Fort Bragg, where she was promoted to captain and became company commander of a paratroop unit with the 82nd Airborne Unit. She went to school to become a jump master. This means that she gets everyone up and is the last to jump. Actually, my 23rd great-grandchild had already jumped out of an airplane 5 times, and he won't even be born till He wasn't born until June. Uh, uh, the, uh, I thought she now is a major, and I think she's going to be the most beautiful general they ever had in the Army. And here's a story called Key West, a Paradise of Pathology. I spent a year in Key West working in a mental health clinic. My colleague at the mental health clinic called Key West a paradise of pathology. My year in Key West was one of the most interesting of my life. Living on a houseboat called Miss Maggie was exciting enough. Finding a position at the mental health clinic added panache, interest, and income. I rode off on my bicycle every morning to try to counsel some of the weird and wonderful island people. I went there because my artist husband, Bob, had gone off to find a place where a nurse and an artist could live happily. He called from Key West with the magic words, "I have found it and have a job." So I rented my house, packed my worldly goods, and drove to Key West. When I arrived, I found that his job was painting pelicans on driftwood and selling them in the marketplace. As he was living in his van, my first job was to find us a place to live. With help from the local newspaper, which was called the Mullet Wrapper by the locals, I found Miss Maggie a houseboat. She boasted an eating bar, a galley, and a bathroom with a tub on the lower deck. The upper area was all one, and we put a mattress on a raised area in the back. Though through a hatch, it was possible to get on the roof, where I spent many happy hours watching the clouds. My work at the clinic was always interesting. I saw a variety of people, young and old. One of the most entertaining clients was a retiree who asked me to marry him every time he came in. I told him that I was married, but there were many ladies who were available. His answer was always, never. All they want to talk about is their grandchildren and their bowels. So he continued. I have just one more story I would like to read to you, and it's called Angels in Disguise. I began to notice the angels in disguise around me when I flew off to Utah for a granddaughter's wedding. As I was getting ready to go, I exchanged purses, my small, everyday one, for a large tote in which I could carry food, a book, and other necessities for airplane travel. I carefully put my driver's license, one must have a photo ID, in an inside pocket, lipstick and a comb in another. A friend called on the phone to wish me bon voyage. When I went back to my purse, I added my lunch, a book, and some munchies. I was ready to go. The only things I forgot, I discovered when I got to Dallas, were cash and a credit card. I ate my banana and peanut butter sandwich and tried to find money for a drink. Oh well, I went to a concession stand and asked the woman for a cup of water. She gave it to me and asked what food I wanted. I said I'd already eaten and had it in fun. I seemed to have forgotten my money anyway. Sandra, angel number one, told me that she would be glad to fix me anything they had without charge. I assured her that I wasn't hungry, but she came around the corner and offered to buy me anything from another booth if I didn't like Taco Bell. I finally convinced her that I had eaten. I told her I would never forget her, and I won't. Another group of angels appeared on a Sunday morning in Montreat, North Carolina. I was on my way to see my daughter in Nashville. I had packed the car with gifts for the children and things to give to my daughter. I drove up toward Asheville and thought it a good place to stop for gasoline. The car was full, all right, but among all the other things I didn't find was a purse. So there I was with no money again. I drove to the first church I saw. It was about 10:30, and they said the minister was in his study and could see me for a moment. I went in and told my story to the minister and the assembled elders. I asked if I could borrow $20 for gasoline. That would more than fill a gas tank in those days. Every wallet came out and had tears in my eyes when I accepted $40 to be paid back on my way home. I drove very carefully without a driver's license and paid the money back happily. I'll never forget those kindly downers either. During a Danube River trip, I became even more aware of angels all around me. On my way home from sightseeing, my husband got on the metro and the doors closed. I was alone in downtown Vienna. I didn't know the place where the boat we were on was moored. So with my halting German, I found the way to what I thought was the right stop. It wasn't, and I was lost on a towpath along the river. But then I met Gerda, who was a group of other college students, and a big pit bull named Oof. She spoke English, and they all walked over 2 miles with me and stayed with me until we found my ship not too long after that. Angel Anya, our tour leader, rescued me and believed saved my life after my husband's sudden death on a train in Budapest. When I got home, my children suddenly sprouted rings before my eyes as they cared for me. I keep finding angels around me every day. If you haven't seen any angels lately, look in the mirror. Just look in the mirror.